I mean, we're in an interesting election year. I think everyone has a vested interest, whatever side you're in voting on this one. Don't you think?
Well, I mean, you want to get into it?
Yeah.
So as a journalist, I've been covering elections for a long time, 30 years or so, or more. And a lot of that was local elections, city councils, county supervisors, state house, even Congress. Those are all kind of local elections. I never really covered a presidential election per se, but I kind of cut my teeth on Washington when I was in journalism school. Between my freshman and sophomore year, I was an intern with my hometown congressman. So I worked in D.C. for a summer as an intern. And boy, talk about not wanting to eat sausage after you've been in the factory. I was 19, 20 and completely disillusioned after working for a few months in Congress. It was like, these people are not going to solve our problems. And I guess that's a helpful attitude when you go on and become a journalist. I'm fairly neutral on that, fairly cynical, and watch the whole political thing from kind of a sideways point of view. I'm not a Republican or a Democrat, haven't been for a real long time. And so I think I have a fairly neutral point of view. And what I'm seeing in the current election rhetoric, if you will, and I've been seeing this for quite a while, is both parties are playing the fear playbook. So I did a couple of pieces along these lines on my Substacks. So I
read the two that you sent me.
Okay, so you saw the Truth Smack pieces. The one I did in July was about called Election Conspiracies, and the one I did in August was called Election Myths. And in a sense, trying to sort of say, this really isn't the end of the world. This really isn't an existential crisis that we face. This is politics as usual. But the parties are ramping up their strategies of getting everybody so scared that they've got to go out there and vote, and they've got to empty their wallets, because really that's what this is all about. This is all about business. Elections are business now. And in fact, I just published a new Humboldt Zag piece this weekend on our favorite congressman. By the way, do you know who your congressman is?
Jared Huffman.
You sure?
Is he a congressman?
You sure?
I don't, actually.
Yeah.
His name is the only name that gets thrown around.
Okay, so yes, Jared Huffman is your congressman. And he has been your congressman since 2012. And he is running for his 7th term, I believe. Anyway, so I just did a piece on that. It's called Jared Huffman's re-election juggernaut, which just kind of, I'm trying to pick on Jared, but it's just take your congressman and see what he has to go through to run a campaign. He's got to spend, I figured he spends about almost $30,000 a month running for Congress. That's a pretty big nut to crack. You got to go out there and
fundraise.
But the irony, and you have to kind of read the piece to understand this, but the irony is he doesn't really need it, because all he has to do is be the Democrat on the ballot and he will win. So effectively, the Democrat in this Congressional District 2 doesn't have any real opposition, doesn't really have an opponent. And so you won't see campaign sign. You won't have a Jared Huffman yard sign, but you will have a Waltz Harris sign.
Or a few of those floating around.
You have one like next door, next to an RIP Halloween thing. It's like rest in peace, Harris Waltz. I thought that was kind of funny. But what's striking me is the fear factor, that this election is being hyped up as an existential threat to democracy by both sides. So the Democrats say, if Trump's elected, it's the end of the world as we know it. It's the end of democracy. We're going to have a tyrant come in. We're going to have Nazism come in. And the Republicans say it's the end of the world if we know it, if those communists get in there and they're going to bring in Soros and they're going to make everybody a drag queen. And so you got this fear. Everyone's afraid that if they don't vote for their team, we're all going to hell in a handbasket. And I'm sorry, we aren't. And if we're going to hell in a handbasket, it's for a lot other different reasons than who's the president. It's probably more for like, who's your congressman? But so that kind of bothers me because I don't think fear is a good reason to vote for anybody.
Well, it's almost a fast fuel. I mean, when you put that kind of energy out there and ramp up the populace, that it's going to be the end of democracy if one side wins. What do you do with all that energy? Doesn't just dissipate. That energy is still there. It's like you're stoking a fire and then it gets so big that you can't control it anymore.
Yeah. And wouldn't you say, looking at all the polarization and the wrangling and the fist fighting that goes on, I call it partisan wrangling that goes on, wouldn't you say that polarization really kind of amps up the fundraising?
Oh, well, it has to.
Because, oh my God, I just got something in my Facebook feed or my Instagram that says the other side is out fundraising us by, a few million. And if we can just make a daily contribution there, it's almost like social media has become like a GoFundMe for politicians. It's like, all I need is another $5 a week from you, and we can maybe win this. And they are raising way more money than they can possibly spend.
And then what do they do with all that money after the campaign's over?
That's a good question, isn't it? Now, of course, they have legal regulations. The Federal Election Commission, FEC, has regulations about what you can and can't do with campaign funds. But one thing you can do is keep rolling it over for the next one.
Was that an original concept that they had when Kamala took over? Because I know that was a point of contention initially, is what's going to happen to Biden's war chest if somebody takes over.
Yeah. There were regulations on that. One of the things I alluded to in my TruthSmack article on election myths, that's truthsmack.substack.com, on election myths, was I came across a video of Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, right? And every now and then she puts up a podcast or something. And I just came across this thing for some reason. And this was back when Biden was still the candidate. But the debate had gone down and Biden was looking bad to everybody, right? So that triggered a internal Democratic Party exploration of what are we going to do about Biden, right? And so AOC was standing up for Biden. And one of the reasons that she gave in this little podcast was that if you just pick somebody else, let's say you pick Gavin Newsom, well, you can't give the money to Gavin Newsom. That's against the regulations. You could give it to Kamala Harris. So that was, I think, one of the reasons AOC was doing this was, legally speaking, don't take all that money we've raised and like lock it up so we can't use it. But the other thing that she said that really struck me and why it ends up in an article about election myths was she was talking about the donor class. And she says, kind of, if you go to my article on election myths, I have a link to this little podcast thing. She's describing this donor class. She's saying that somewhere between the voters and the government is this donor class that kind of is the go-between. And she described being in rooms where these donors are having these discussions. And she was kind of ticked off because a lot of stuff was getting leaked to the press, and it would be somebody speaking on the basis of anonymity said that Biden has to go because of X, Y, and Z or whatever. And she was kind of saying, why don't you put your name on it? You know, what's the anonymity about? And this kind of spills over into the whole area of conspiracy theories where you've got a shadowy cabal that's kind of running things. And to be honest, you know, there are a lot of shadowy cabals running things. In my research and writing and stuff, I haven't found that there's one that runs everything. And maybe that's what really keeps us alive and surviving, is that there are competing shadowy cabals that have different ideas of what they think should happen, probably based upon having different businesses and different business interests. So, for instance, coal is a different profit center than petroleum. So, you know, there are very wealthy, industrial, powerful people that have different ways that they're gaining. And so they haven't been able to get together and control everything, you know. But there are these powerful groups, powerful people that we really don't even know their names, that are pulling a lot of strings. And so what happened was, in the case of Biden stepping down, what I saw was George Clooney walks out of some fundraiser in Hollywood, the biggest fundraiser of any presidential campaign of any time. I mean, I don't know how many millions they raised, but he walks out of there and says, people are talking about Biden stepping down. It was kind of somebody said, hey, George, you know, people love you, you know, can you kind of break this for the public so it isn't like some politician doing it or something? It's good old George Clooney. So he kind of led the foray into, what are we going to do besides Biden here? And so anyway, they eventually settle on Kamala Harris, which from my point of view seemed obvious. I mean, Kamala Harris was the vice president. So, I mean, or is the vice president. So, I mean, that seems to be part of that job, is to take over. And if I were running the world, I would have had Biden step down after a couple of years and let her take over now, you know, in that course, so she'd actually be president now instead of worrying about an election. But somebody didn't want that to happen. Somebody did want Joe Biden to step down. And who are the people doing all that talking and decision-making? I don't think most of us know. We just know that they have a lot of money. The other thing I mentioned in the section on election myths, which is that one of the myths is that our elections are free and fair.
I want to talk about that, but I want to touch on the ousting of Biden for a second.
Okay.
What is your interpretation of that event? Because I had heard floated that it was Pelosi, Obama, they had kind of gotten together after the debate and realized Biden's not going to make it. He's not the candidate, and we need to start looking for a replacement.
You know, I don't have any inside information on.
No, but what is your interpretation? What do you think? Do you think it was just a very poor debate performance and they...
Well, I think Biden is senile. I think that's pretty clear.
Depends on who you ask.
Well,
I know a lot of people...
You just asked me.
Yeah. I know a lot of people still riding the Biden camp.
Well, fine. You know, I'm not a doctor either. I would say that Biden has struck me as being suffering from senility for a few years. To be honest, I've never been a Biden fan, and it amazed me that Biden actually was put up there for president in 2020. Really? It's kind of how I feel about Trump. Really? I mean, this is the best we got, Trump and Biden? I mean, that was like really sad in 2020. It's even sadder in 2024. There's plenty of other people, but anyway, I think that polling has a big place in these kind of decisions. They are polling all the time, and every party has a pollster, and every candidate has a pollster, and everybody's polling all the time and trying to gauge public reaction to things. And I think that the polling on Biden just plummeted after that debate. I don't think they could probably find I don't know what the percentages were, but I don't think they could find a sizable size of the population that thought, oh, yeah, man, he just nailed it.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people were energized after that
Yeah.
debate.
So that, I think, is probably a big factor, that the polling. If the polling had showed that people were still hanging on to Biden, then they would have, I think. But
And you weren't surprised at the transition to Kamala? You thought that was where they were going to go from the beginning?
I didn't think that. I thought, well, now they've really opened it up and who knows what's going to happen. But I would say that that she's the safest position based on what I understand. She can keep the money.
Which seems to be the primary motivator.
Yeah.
And if you raise all of this money, you don't want to just burn it like we were talking about.
Exactly.
So who's the person that can hang on to that? Well, Kamala.
Yeah.
Which is interesting considering the polling, because she was polling very low, wasn't she, as vice president?
I'm not sure. I mean, her rise to where she is now is like kind of beyond belief.
Incredible.
I mean, she didn't even actually make it through the primaries in 2020. You know, she threw it out there,
blown out of the water.
A lot of people do. I mean, you see this is a pretty consistent pattern. Someone, say like a Gavin Newsom or a Chris Christie or even a Ron DeSantis, you know, you feel the waters. You know, you throw your name out there and you see how far you get, and you figure, well, maybe in 4 years I'll do better. And you know, that's a common strategy. So she threw it out there. She had really very little experience in the federal government. She was a senator for, I don't know, a year or two, and decides to run for president. I don't think I would guess that she didn't think that she would win. And by the end of I don't think she even made it into the first primaries.
She didn't. She got blown out of the water after that first debate. Tulsi Gabbard kind of lit her on fire up on that stage.
Yeah. So then she returns as the vice presidential running mate. And you kind of have to ask yourself, how'd that happen? Who decides that J.D. Vance is going to be the vice president, or Mike Pence is going to be the vice president, or Tim Keene, Hillary's vice president?
Oh, wow.
Who
I
are
don't
these
even
people?
know who Tim Keene is.
Who are these people? Tim Keene, excuse me. I mean, that's what I'm saying. It's like, where do they get these people? Tim Waltz, where do they get these people? Somebody's getting them. I don't know who they are, but you see what I'm saying? If you just look at where did the vice presidents come from, they're obviously some notion that the vice presidents are going to help the ticket get elected. So you're going to try to pick somebody that maybe will solidify a voting block that the presidential candidate may lose. So you get a Southerner with a Northerner or whatever, East and a West. There's a lot of that, but I kind of wonder who decides, you know, who really does. And the idea that the presidential candidate decides, you know, maybe some of them, that's true. Maybe the ones that said, by God, I'm going to pick my vice president. But I have a feeling that there's another group of people in these parties that kind of figure this out. And those, and putting forward a candidate that they feel will benefit somehow from it and will benefit their donor base or their constituency in some way. I don't know. There's just, I guess all I'm saying is there's a whole lot of backdoor, smoke-filled room stuff going on, and it's all with people with tons of money in their pockets. And that's why I suspect that American elections are not free and fair like we like to believe, because if you have more money, you get more votes, you know, in a way. It's not one person, one vote, it's $1, one vote, really. And that our election system has, in my lifetime, gone from kind of being perhaps a democratic exercise to a business. It's an industry now. People are making tons of money off of elections now. And if you can polarize and you can get people fighting and riled up, and they'll open up that checkbook or they'll go on Venmo, bang, you know, you're building your industry.
When do you think that shift started to take place? Because presumably at one point we did have free and fair elections?
Well, I think money's always been a problem, but I would say that exactly when I couldn't say, but let me just give you this as a perspective. When Congress first met, so think back, we got the Revolutionary War. When did the first Congress meet? Well, the first Congress didn't meet, the Congress as we know it, for over a decade because they hadn't written the Constitution yet. So we get this breakaway, we get the colonies breaking away, right? And we got states now. And they adopt a thing called the Articles of Confederation, which is basically saying we have these states, and these states will band together for various purposes, but it's pretty lightweight, and the states are the ones that are doing everything, and we'll just have these sort of national meetings every now and then and make sure everybody's kind of on the same page. And that's kind of Articles of Confederation. Well, the Constitution was written by people who felt that they needed to have a little bit more control over things than that, and especially people in commerce. So the feeling was, we got to have something else here to produce a strong central government that's going to be bankable to the world. And that's kind of what drove the Constitution. Now, when the first Congress, as we know it, met was in 1789, and there were 59 members of Congress. 59 members of Congress. They probably all knew each other. And that's when elections were free and fair, okay, because people knew who was on the ballot. They knew that family, or that those people had a reputation from that part of the country or that town or something. So the democracy that we think of as what we'd like to believe we have, I think did exist in some way when America was small and had a whole bunch of small towns and 59 people were in Congress. The population grew. And as the population grew, they slowly expanded the number of congressional seats. Of course, the Senate seats stayed the same, 2 per state. But the House of Representatives grew and grew and grew and grew and grew.
For a second,
Yeah.
The audio is not moving. It seems to have stopped.
We're going to give it some check. Hold that thought. Working through tech stuff.
It's all good.
Part of the project. Okay, continue.
Tech's great until it doesn't work.
That's the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, if it can go wrong, that's what I've learned in podcasting. If it can go wrong, it will. And then you just address it and keep going.
That's right. So I think it was, so Congress kind of grew.
Starts out small. Everybody knows everybody.
In 1911, I believe, they passed a law saying, we're not going to expand Congress anymore. Which meant that in the last 100 years, every congressional member represents more and more people.
What was the decision not to expand?
It was some law they passed saying,
this is what it is.
It's going to be 435. That's it. We reached 435 members of Congress. We're not going to add a 436th. I don't know. It's like, we got 50 states. We're not having any more. I don't know. They decided no more seats. We'll just expand the representation of each seat. So we still have, 100 years later, we still have the same number of people in Congress, but they represent 2, 3, 4 times the amount of people that they used to. And what that means is that most of the people on your ballot, you don't know their name. You have no idea who they are. You're a consumer that must be marketed to. So we have to package these candidates and we have to sell them to you in a mass market kind of way, because there's no way for you to know who they actually are. They're very rarely is it going to be somebody from your hometown or somebody that the family is known or they have a history. So somewhere along the line, we got into mass marketing in the last 100 years. And I think that kind of stepped up with the advent of television. And we had the presidential debates on TV with, Nixon and Kennedy. And it went from there to it's a mass market deal. It's a business. It's a mass communications problem to be solved. It's how do you package a candidate? And that's where we're at. So you might say, well, I don't know these people from Adam and Eve, but I'm voting my party because I figure my party probably is
A safe bet.
a safe bet.
I'm a Democrat. I'm a Republican.
Yeah.
They're this, they're that. I can probably trust them.
So that becomes, in a sense, your cue. And so what happens then is the elections tend to start becoming more and more homogenous. So, for instance, I looked at some recent statistics from the Cook Political Report, which does analysis of voter composition and this and that across the country. And according to Cook, we now have a situation where 85% of the congressional districts are what they call safe, meaning that they haven't changed party in recent memory and probably won't. And this is a phenomenon that's come about in the last few decades through two things. One is redistricting. So every time there's a census and there's a new population number, they figure out who loses a congressional seat and who gets one. So the places that lose population and the places that gain population have to be redrawn so that we still have 435 members of Congress representing everybody. And so when that happens every 10 years, the two major corporate parties get together and they battle it out, trying to figure out how they can get a safe district out of it. And that's what they do. They get, so in the 2010 census, for instance, North Coast was carved in a slightly different way. So it is a thoroughly Democratic bastion now. And only, as I calculated, only 18% of the registered voters in Congressional District 2 are Republicans. So the Democrat's going to win. And so the only real competition, the only real choice is who will win the primary. And so a lot of money is poured into primaries because whoever wins that primary and goes on the ballot as a Democrat, or I'm from San Diego, I grew up in a Republican safe district, so that, I mean, the congressman that I worked for in D.C. as an intern was a congressman for life. I mean, he that was his job since he was about 30. And once he was in a safe Republican district, he was never unseated. So that's what redistricting has done. And also our own mobility as people. It seems that what I've read is that people tend to gravitate towards areas where they feel more comfortable. And so what do you know? We have red states and blue states now. And I was just looking at a figure today that says that only like a dozen states have had a different party win, say, a senatorial election. And that the vast majority of the states have the same party in the Senate and the same party configuration for their congressional seats every year. It never changes. So we're kind of becoming more and more homogenous, I guess you will say.
Well, and especially for a state like California, we've been blue for decades now, especially at the presidential level. If you're in California and you're voting for a Republican for president, does your vote really matter?
Yeah, and maybe those kind of things are reasons why people leave. Maybe if you're like a bluey in a red state or a reddy in a blue state, you get fed up and you leave somewhere and you go somewhere where you're going to be more fitting in, I guess. So,
or you just don't vote. You just stop voting.
Yeah. So now they figure this year there are 7 swing states. They call them swing states. Those are states that we're not sure how they're going to go. So out of 50 states, only 7 count in some way, right? It doesn't matter whether I vote. Democrat's going to win in my my area. I can be happy with that. I can be sad. I can be, as I am, nonplussed. But that's what's going to happen in most states. They're going to go the way they went last time. And so all the resources can now be focused on the swing states. And likewise, they can be focused on the swing elections. So what all of this safety, what I'm calling safety, the safe districting, has brought about is a way to focus on just the places that have an honest competition. Not that many, maybe 15% of all the races in the country. They're not sure who's going to win. Otherwise, 85% of them they are. So that's the state of our elections, and that's why the idea that your vote counts might be called a myth. It kind of depends on where you live as to whether your vote counts. But money is going to be the big driver, and everybody wants money. And if I may just mention this, in the Jared Huffman story I just published, we're waiting for the third quarter figures to come out. But so I based my story on the 1 year plus 2 quarters up through June 30th. The new figures will be out this month, and I'm going to update the story for 3 quarters of this year. But looking over Huffman's record, he's able to raise about $1 million every election season, every 2-year cycle. He can raise about $1 million, and he doesn't need it. He doesn't need $1 million to win. So he spends it as best he can. You know, he spends it on the things you'd spend it on, but he's got money left over. So he sends money to other campaigns. So this year he gave money to both Barbara Lee and Adam Schiff in the California's U.S. Senate race. They're in a primary to replace Dianne Feinstein. And there were, I think, 3 Democrats that were running in the primary in March to replace Dianne Feinstein. And Huffman gave money to 2 of the 3. I don't know, hedging his bets or whatever. But I mean, Adam Schiff won the primary, and he's the guy that's on the ballot now. Adam Schiff has raised millions. He doesn't need Huffman's 1,000. So I'm not clear on exactly why candidates shift money to other people's campaigns. I don't know if they do it because they've been told that so-and-so needs it, or they feel it'll grease a wheel that they want greased, or they're paying back a favor that they got. I don't know exactly how it works. No one really wants to talk to me about this, but what I'm saying is there's so much money that Huffman was able to give away $50,000 to other candidates. And then there's still money left over, and that's called cash on hand. He's got $1 million of cash on hand, I guess, to roll over to the next 2-year cycle in case something blows up, it's mad money. In case something crazy happens and he's got to spend a ton of money, he's got some in reserve. I don't know, but all of them have this.
Well, and that seems a little crazy that you can just roll over money someone has donated for you and for your campaign. If I give money to Jared Huffman, maybe I'm not supportive of Adam Schiff. And now the money that I've donated to you is now going to that campaign.
I would say the implication is that, well, if you gave the money to Jared, you trust him to give the money to whoever needs it. Maybe you do, maybe you don't, right? But this happens, and campaigns do it all the time. There's just so much money out there. It's almost like Hurricane Milton. It's like, what are we going to do with all this water? You know, how are we going to? So they're awash in cash. And what I kind of indicate in the Jared Huffman reelection juggernaut story is that some of these expenses kind of look like a member of Congress has a little perfectly legal slush fund to sort of, live a little larger than you otherwise would, because, hey, it's money that's got to be spent, somehow. So I know, let's have a campaign event up at the Klamath River and we'll go fishing. And so Jared Huffman does an annual fishing expedition, fly fishing expedition, different places, but and I asked the campaign, well, just tell me a little bit more about that. Why is it a fundraising event to take a bunch of people fishing? Or indeed, if you are taking a bunch of people fishing, I don't know. All I've got are numbers. And the answer was none of your business. Basically, we want to respect the privacy of our donors, so we're not going to tell you what we did. But they spent, I don't know, $15,000 going fishing this year.
Well, and that's an important aspect, is you're courting donors in this. You're not taking Bill from small town wherever who gave you $5, right? You're taking someone who has the potential to give you tens of thousands of dollars.
I would guess, yeah. But you would have a certain class of donor and then of course you can only take so much from a donor. So there are limits. And so a lot of campaigns, you'll find records of how they refunded contributions because the people were so enthusiastic about sending in another check that they actually went over the limit. You got to return it because they can only give so much as an individual. The way they've worked around that is to create these PACs and 527 committees or whatever that have nothing to do with the campaign and are not coordinating in any way, but they might support a candidate based upon an issue or a party affiliation or whatever. There's a movie I saw recently. I don't know if you ever saw this movie. It's called Irresistible. It was made a few years ago, I think 2016, right after Hillary lost. And it stars Steve Carell as a political consultant. It's called Irresistible. If you have a chance to see it, it's pretty funny. But
I think I did see that. He's working on a campaign against his ex-wife, who's also doing a campaign.
Chris Cooper plays this good old Marine out there in farmland, Wisconsin, that he's going to help run for mayor of this little dinky town. And all this attention gets put on it, and all the cameras are coming in from all over the country. And it's kind of based on a special election in Georgia that this actually happened, where it was kind of a small election, but somebody figured out it was really important to the parties. And so millions and millions were spent on it. And so anyway, I thought it was a pretty funny look at what really happens. At least it routinely happens at the congressional level. It routinely happens, I think, maybe at the state house level in some states, especially like in California, where you've got a lot of money and full-time legislators. I lived in Colorado for 18 years, and the Colorado legislature is part-time. You go up there for 6 months and you go home. It's not like it used, like back in the 1789 where, your Congress meets and then you go back to the farm or whatever. It's not your job. But now we have people who have jobs in government and jobs being elected officials, and they hire staff. So, for instance, little Jared Huffman, who's by most counts a very modest member of Congress, he only raises $1 million an election cycle. That's not much. He's not lavish in some, in his own campaign. Says, well, look, we didn't do junkets to the Super Bowl. We took people fishing, So, I mean, he's kind of a little guy, and he's raising only about $1 million, and $6,000 a month goes to his campaign manager, and $3,500 a month goes to a fundraiser in D.C. who puts on fundraisers in D.C. for donors in D.C. And there's even in this movie I mentioned, Irresistible, there's even a scene where they take Chris Cooper's good old Marine guy, Colonel, out to D.C. to do a little fundraising at a house party. So this goes on all the time, house parties and Beltway extravaganzas and galas and stuff, and all the donors come out. So he's given this guy, this DC fundraiser, $3,500 a month for years to raise money. And I calculated that based upon the data that I had, 60% of the funds raised pay fundraisers.
Yeah. Well, it is business. And especially at the party level, it is a business. You have the Republican Party and the Democrat Party, and they're essentially fundraising machines. And the question is, how much of that money does Jared have a direct say over, and how much of it is influenced by party decisions? About, like you said, with this candidate, maybe the Democrat Party needs a little extra funding for this guy, so buck up because it's for the good of the party.
Well, and I asked that question. I said, is the shifting of campaign funds from here to there part of a coordinated effort to take money from safe districts and put it into money where there's competition? Nobody wanted to answer that question. So I just looked at some of the races the money went to, and I didn't see a pattern where the beneficiary of the funds was in any kind of dire straits to raise money. Adam Schiff was not in dire straits to raise money. Huffman gave a very small contribution, $500, to the woman who's running for Senate in Washington. And, she's had 3 or 4 terms as a U.S. Senator from Washington. Her name is kind of Maria Cantwell, I believe it is. And looking at her campaign finance documents, she raises millions of dollars and wins handily in Washington state. So I didn't see a pattern jump out that said, we're moving safe money to competitive districts. So I would guess that the other scenario that came to mind is that this is an organic kind of friends helping friends. I know Zoe Lofgren up on the Hill and she helps, and so I'm going to give her some money just to sort of spread the goodwill around, if you will. That's what it seems like, but no one would actually tell me.
Yeah, I can't imagine they're very forthcoming with all of that information.
Well, nothing that they're doing is illegal, and they're
famous last words.
They're very clear to say that, and I'm not saying it is, but I would like to know how this game is played. And that's part of what I think politicians don't want voters to know. They really kind of don't want them to know how the game is played, because it's like watching sausage being made. You may lose a customer with your sausage sales once they see what you're doing to make it.
I think one of the big concerns is that we're going to reach a point in time where there are no swing states. Because those are really the controlling factors in an election, and who wins is these swing states, right? And so what happens when that question is no longer on the table? That you can predictably say, oh, we know this state is going to go blue or this state's going to be red. And then it just continues to track. I mean, what are the odds that California ever flips red again?
Yeah, and I would say that, let's say that we have a trend where there's only one swing state, and that means you only have to really fund election campaigns in one state. The rest of them, you don't even have to do it. And that would be great to me. It would be great that people don't spend millions and billions of dollars on elections. I would love to see all that money going to something else that's actually going to help people.
But is that a democracy at that point? If you're just buying off one state to win the election?
Democracy? Once you've got money in there, I'm going to call it oligarchy. Now, maybe you don't like that, but to me, what I see is America is an oligarchy. The best oligarchy money can buy, but it always has been an oligarchy. It's always been about a wealthy class, whether it's Thomas Jefferson and George Washington, or it's, George Clooney or whoever. It's always been about the wealthy classes controlling everything, having their way. We little people get something. We get enough. I think they figured this out. We get enough so that we don't have a revolution. Everybody's working way too hard to try to make too much money, but it seems okay. I'm not going to have a revolution. So then the machine can keep going. But it's oligarchy. It's a small group of people running everything, and money will make the difference. So instead of an oligarchy where your bloodline gives you you're the Duke of Kent because you're a certain family and it's in your blood or something to have a title or so. We got rid of that. Titles can now be bought. And that was kind of the main innovation in the American colonies from the old world, that instead of titles being something that were handed down hereditarily, titles can be bought. We have a gentry here, but Jefferson and Madison and Alexander Hamilton sitting around by candlelight weren't talking about democracy. They were talking about, how do we control the masses? And do we let black people have a vote? Well, no. Slavery is okay. I mean, that's the reality. We have founding fathers who were slaveholders. It was like, slavery is okay. If you're not a slave owner, it's okay for your neighbor to be one. So, I mean, we've had this kind of foundational history of the wealthy classes wanting to control everything and pretty much doing so.
Yeah. I mean, that is in part the story, right? Because, I mean, even at a base level, you had to be a landowner to vote.
Right. Yeah. Male, white. Another thing I brought up in one of my stories, I told you about AOC's little podcast. I also saw this little clip from Chris Wallace, the famous broadcaster. I think he was with CNN. Now he's with somebody else. But Chris Wallace covered the Democratic National Convention, and he's standing, there's this little clip, and I have it in my story. We can watch it. He's standing in the Democratic Convention, some kind of big arena, whatever it was. And he's looking around and he goes, "You see the suites way up there?" And he talks to his cameraman. Get a shot of that. Look at that. Okay, those are the people who are paying for this. Those suites go for $1 million, $500,000. My news organization is not up there. Who is, these are the people who are putting this on. And so I went to the website for the Democratic National Convention. And Chris Wallace, to his credit, said it was the same thing at the Republican National. This is not a critique of the Democratic Party. It's a critique of how parties in America now operate, that in their conventions, they sell the upstairs, the penthouse suites to the wealthy, who then, as Chris Wallace says, look down on the rest of us who are passionate to get our team to win, and are maybe going to put up signs and knock on doors and call people, and they're going to send letters and postcards to urge people to vote. But the people who are kind of running the show are just looking down from these.
Watching from above.
Yeah. And it was, you can go on the DNC website and see who sponsored the convention. It's all these major corporations.
Do you buy into the idea, because this is the natural extension of all of this, is the idea of some deep state? Do you buy into that, or you think it's just a separate entity of powerful people who are joined in certain issues, but there's no overarching unity?
Okay, so deep state has a couple different definitions, and it's kind of evolving.
Well, now you'll hear, I don't know if it was, I think it was Vivek Ramaswamy that was trying to change that to the managerial class.
I think that, if you look at the origins and the use of the phrase deep state, it goes back a while. It goes back a few decades. And the original concept was, in a sense, the bureaucratic or administrative state, because politicians come and go, elected officials come and go, but the staff are the same. Even the political appointments, the head of the FBI may change every 4 years or quicker. But, the third in command's been there for 30 years, and he's going to be there for 50. So there is this verifiable, class of bureaucrats. And I mean, I think that's kind of resonates with everybody. What a bureaucracy is and what a bureaucrat is. It's a large institution that doesn't really have a political life. It's carrying out the orders, in a sense, of the politicians, of the political class, but it's there, and you work for the IRS. You can have a career in the IRS. You're working in the Justice Department. You're working in labor. You're working in these large centralized bureaucracies, and you watch the political waves come and go and the elected officials come and go, and you're still there. And as a result of that, there is some inertia where if the bureaucrats don't really like the way this politician or this president or this whatever is doing, you'll wait a few years and then you'll be able to go back to doing what you wanted to do, or you will push and maybe not do that. Find ways to drag your feet on things you don't like. So I think that that's a real thing. Whether the notion that's kind of emerged in the last 5 to 10 years of there's a deep state that like they have deep state meetings and they figure out what they're all going to do, and there's like a coordinated strategy of what the deep state's going to do. I think that's a little bit harder to prove. And maybe this goes back to my first political science class I took at Northwestern when I was a journalism student. I took a, poli-sci 101 class, and the textbook for the class was called The Irony of Democracy, and the writer of the textbook basically made the case that the only reason we have anything that resembles democracy is that there's competing elites. And they don't all agree and they don't all get along. And so they fight amongst each other. And that kind of saves the rest of us from being in a totalitarian system. And I would tend to say that early kernel of theoretical knowledge from college class has proven to explain a lot of what I see, that there's competing interests.
But what happens when there aren't competing interests? What happens when there's some overarching unity that starts to manifest?
Well, there is a lot of that.
It feels like it now.
It is. And I think that, like, for instance, say the military-industrial complex, which we were warned about with Eisenhower, and we've been warned about it ever since, that this network of the military and the defense contractors and the politicians to make a business out of war is something that we shouldn't. I mean, Eisenhower said we shouldn't let that happen, but it did. And so war is now a business, and war is something that both parties agree on. And so to me, what both parties agree on gives you a hint as to what is this deep state we're talking about. Both parties agree that war is good and that the United States should spend every dime possible to make sure we're fighting wars overseas and not on our own shores. So in my lifetime, when I was a kid, there was a war in Vietnam. And that was hard for us to understand at the time. And as time has gone by, even harder to understand why in the world did 60,000 Americans go over there and die in Vietnam, But that was part of this program after World War II of making sure that the wars were fought somewhere else. And that's what we've managed to succeed in. And the United States has been very good at getting the wars fought somewhere else and selling the weapons somewhere else and letting them destroy their countries and kill all their people. And we benefit by being able to sell the weapons and to arm whatever side we want, even arm both sides, which we did in the Iran-Iraq war of the early 90s. It was an 8-year war between Iran and Iraq, and we sold to both sides. And we are currently inextricably, in my mind, fueling a war in Ukraine. fueling a war in Israel, arming everybody we possibly can, and both parties are voting for it and going, yeah, sure. And then they go back to their constituents and have to explain why they're cutting budgets and why you can't do that unless we raise taxes. And then they got to explain to their constituents why we just sent another $63 billion somewhere in weapons. Well, part of the argument back is that those weapons are made here in the United States. So when we sell weapons to Ukraine or we sell weapons to Israel, we're creating jobs. So this is good. This is good for war is good for the economy because we're creating jobs for Americans to build weapons so that other people can kill each other and destroy their countries. Now, my sensibility says that's crazy. But that to me is like an example of the deep state where everybody's on board except a few of us crazies who think war is nonsense. What is it good for? Everybody loves it. Everybody wants the jobs. Everybody wants the safety of having people killing each other instead of be over here killing us.
Well, and that's been an incredibly effective message that they have sold to the American people, that by having these wars over there, we are safer.
Yeah.
That as long as we can keep them isolated to the Middle East or to Russia and Ukraine, we're good. And we should keep funding it because it'll stay over there. And if we stop, then it's going to come to the homeland, which is just not true.
Yeah.
But that's the dream that they're selling. And that was the craziest thing to watch Kamala Harris come out after the hurricane and talk about this $750 loan that they're going to be giving to people after they just sent an additional, $8 or $11 billion to Israel.
Yeah.
But no, you can have $750. The people in Lahaina, in Hawaii. No, don't look at the money we're sending to Ukraine and Israel. Here's your little kickback.
Yeah.
This small amount of money that's not going to have any impact. You can get a hotel room for a couple nights. But we're gonna keep sending the money where it really needs to go, which is abroad.
Yeah. So I think there is that. I think another example is how both parties were able to pass and vote for bank bailouts in 2009. The Wall Street misbehaved. Wall Street made a bunch of bad gambles. Wall Street overextended itself and risked too much, and some investment bankers were going to lose their shirts. And what I would have done is I would have said, let's bail out the homeowners who are going to lose their mortgages or something in this thing. But what Bush did was bail out the banks. Well, he's got a brother who's a banker, Neil. It's like, that's where the oligarchy looks at it. That's where the deep state looks at it. The people who need to be bailed out are not the people who are going to get thrown out of their houses because they have a mortgage they can't afford. The people who are going to get bailed out are the bankers.
Was it Bush that bailed him out, or was it Obama?
It was Bush. And Obama did a different bailout. He did a bailout of Detroit. But there's this notion that both parties embrace, that it's okay for the government to bail out bad business decisions. Your bad business decision this time, Mr. Bush, your bad business decision this time, Mr. Obama, whatever, but we're going to be there for you.
At the expense of the public.
Well, I don't know about you, but I don't have a whole lot more money to give in taxes. How am I supposed to fund all that?
It's hard not to see some semblance of a hidden state force at that level. And I don't mean state as in, it's the states that are doing this, but some actors behind the scene that are kind of calling the shots and bringing forward some unison in that regard. That, okay, we need to bail these people out.
Yeah. So, yeah, those kind of uniparty moves, I think, show the hand of the real deep state. Now, I think Trump and Trump supporters feel about this deep state is that there are Democrats in the bureaucracy that don't like Trump, so they target him for unfair treatment or whatever. And there may be some of that. It probably works both ways. There's probably some Democrats that are getting hit by the FBI unfairly. So again, it's not, I don't think it's a monolith, but
Well, it's definitely not. I mean, you saw that with AOC when she was initially coming on the scene. She was talking about bucking the system and going against the idea of that unit party and even the Democrats in some sense. And then as soon as she gets in, she falls in line, like everybody does.
yeah, you kind of have to. And one of the things that I was thinking about recently is how we were talking about, do the parties coordinate how candidates send money to other campaigns? And one of the things that I have seen with my own eyes is how the parties control legislative bodies. So the State House in Sacramento or Congress, the parties are calling a whole lot of shots. And they're saying, okay, we want you to, our top priority is for you to get reelected. So for you to get reelected, let's say, Nick, you get elected to Sacramento. You're going to represent the North Coast in the state legislature. Party's going to sit down with you and say, look, and whatever party you win with, we'll do this. These are the bills you're going to carry, because these bills will give you ammunition to go into your reelection phase, which you're going to have to do in about 6 months. When you finally figure out where the men's room is here in Sacramento, by then you're going to have to start going out and fundraising, and you're going to have to start going out and doing this whole reelection thing. And so we're going to give you some bills that you can stand up and say you supported or you carried. And if you have any problem with that, we'll work out something so that you can vote your conscience, but it won't change the outcome. If let's say you really don't like the military thing, you just really want to not vote for that military assistance that we're going to give to Israel. It's okay. We've got the votes for it, so you can vote against it, and it'll still pass. We've worked that out. We've worked the numbers out. This goes on all the time, so that the goal of you getting reelected is served. And so it's a big game.
It's a terrifying thought. Well, not even a thought, a terrifying practice. We're just going to move these votes around because we've got them. We know who's going to vote which way. So you want to hold up your fist and virtue signal a little bit. You can't on these ones.
Yeah.
We'll throw one your way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've known some politicians who would admit to this. And I've known some politicians who wouldn't. And I always admired the ones who would. The ones who basically said, yeah, I'm a horse trader. And that's what we do.
Well, it makes sense when you have these career politicians like Mitch McConnell or Nancy Pelosi who have this is their life, is they're in politics. How do you stay there? Well, you have to play the game. You got to play ball.
Yeah. So as far as, the presidential election goes, I mean, my feeling is don't be afraid.
I'm afraid.
Don't be afraid. I mean, what are you afraid of?
Truthfully, I don't think my fears are going to be assuaged by any candidate. Because it seems, especially if you take Israel-Palestine, it seems like both candidates are pretty gung-ho at continuing that war.
Right.
I do like some of Trump's standpoints on censorship, probably just because I do this, and you pay attention to things that have come out in the Twitter files and what the Biden-Harris campaign or their cabinet has done and has continued to do. That worries me a little bit. But I'm a little worried for both sides. And it feels like we are on a train that has built up so much momentum that regardless of who gets in there, we're going to stay on this path. And the path is war. More war.
Okay, so
that's what I'm afraid of. That's a little more existential than
no, and
election.
I would say that's probably why we get along, because to me, the things that I don't want to see, I'm not going to use the word I'm afraid of. I'm concerned about, say, the things I'm concerned about aren't going to get changed because of who I vote for. They're going to get changed because of how I live my life. And they may not get changed. You know, I mean, I don't rule the world. You know, I can't make things happen. I can't make wars go away. But I can try to make peace with people in my own life. I can try to have a dialogue with somebody that I may not agree with or I may not like. I can try to build a community that I live in, not one that's in my intellectual world that's out there somewhere, the one that I can see and walk around in. Can I do something that brings about the things that I'm concerned about right here and now? I kind of call it a paradigm shift from being a voter to being a leader. Because I'm at a place in my life where I don't need leaders. I don't need an elected leader to represent me. I don't need a Congress. I don't need a state house. I don't need this whole industry is not what I need to try to solve the problems that I have. I'm the one. You're the one. My neighbors are the one. We're the ones that need to make the changes that are going to bring about the communities we want to live in. Instead of throwing our money away on political campaigns and getting all worked up and worrying about how we're going to vote. I think it's in some ways, I hate to say this, but I feel like elections and voting are kind of a distraction. It's kind of something, it's an industry and it's an entertainment form for a lot of people, but it's not changing anything that's important to me. So I don't put a whole lot of confidence in it. I don't put a whole lot of my hope in it. And that's why I say to you, Nick, don't be afraid. Not that there's nothing to be afraid of out there, but that you've got to do what you can do with what you've got to make this world better and not disempower yourself by waiting around for somebody that you vote for to do it. And this is like really getting off of journalism into kind of personal philosophy, but I just feel like personal empowerment is down that road of real democracy is what you do every day in your life and how you treat people and where you consume and where you produce. And I also, I'm a permaculturist, so we kind of see the shift of going from being consumers to being producers. Try to create a village where we can solve our problems together with some equity and fairness. And, we'll see if the political systems that we have depended upon survive. They may not, but I'm not afraid of that. There may be, in a sense, a metaphorical hurricane heading our way. I'm going to make sure I got some water. I'm going to make sure that I got a plan. And I'm going to try to get to know my neighbors and see it through. That's the best I could do.
Do you think that metaphorical storm will happen regardless of who wins in November?
Yes. It's kind of like, Nick, it's like you see these things that are unsustainable. You see these things that are unsustainable. And they can't continue. Like, for instance, the price of housing can't go up forever. At some point, nobody can afford it. And then the price has to come down or nobody buys any house. I mean, some things are unsustainable. And if they're unsustainable, they will collapse. And I've seen in my lifetime, and, I've been a journalist most of it, and I've been watching it and writing about it. Americans have been building an unsustainable house of cards for my entire lifetime. Most of those cards are fossil fuels that we use to get things done that we can't really sustain otherwise. And the burning of fossil fuel for the last 100 years has really created a lot of other problems. And so this unsustainable system is going to collapse at some point. And I think getting ready for that, adapting, looking at it straight on for what it is, a hurricane's coming, a flood is coming. What do? Build a boat. Meet some people who have boats if you can't build one. What's the point of thinking that this is going to go on forever and that we're going to fix it by tweaking it a little bit? The Democrats will fix it a little bit, or the Republicans will fix it a little bit. This is not something you can just fix a little bit. It'll be okay. It's falling apart. It's a bus headed for a cliff. And Trump and Harris are fighting over who's going to steer it off the cliff. Big deal. I'm getting off the bus.
Do you think that our social experiment of this form of government, do you think that that essentially is the bus that's heading towards the cliff? Do you think that it'll collapse or has the capability to collapse at a national level?
The only reason that what we have and what we've experienced as modern American life hasn't collapsed already is because of credit. Okay? We have spent more than we brought in. Just in terms of a large metaphor, we have spent more than we brought in. We are in debt. We have borrowed. As a matter of fact, credit card debt is at an all-time high. Government debt is an all-time high. We are a country of debtors. And we have been sold debt on this idea that, well, get it now and pay something on it, and eventually you'll be able to pay it off, and you'll probably get paid better. So, just trust that you can actually have this and go into debt to get it because it'll work out. And so to me, it's like, no, it's not going to work out. You actually can't afford it. So get used to it. Instead of trying to figure out where you're going to get more energy, just use less, okay? That's simplify. Instead of figuring out how you're going to do more in a 24-hour period, figure out how you're going to do less. The things that I feel are probably like on another planet to most people. But I've just, I'm in my 60s. I'm done with it. I'm done with the rat race. I'm done with mobility. I'm done with climbing the ladder. It doesn't mean anything to me anymore. It's like I just want to have a nice little neighborhood. My goals are pretty low. Can I have a nice little neighborhood where I know my neighbors and we can grow food and somebody maybe got some chickens and we can trade? And, what's wrong with being a villager? It's something that, we put into the past, but it actually villages were human survival for eons until, fairly recently when we decided that we'd try cities. And I think it's a dead end. I think it's a collapse. I think it's a bus going off a cliff. This is a way far away from what you asked me to talk about, and I'm sorry. But my hope is that we stay friends and we see this through together and we make the world a little bit better place and not get too distracted by the marketing forces around us.
I think that's a great way to put it. I think we can end it on that. I know we got to get you out of here. Do you want to plug where people can find all your work, your various Substacks?
Okay, so I have 3 Substacks. So the best one for me is called abufrancis.substack.com. Abu Francis, and that's my permaculture Substack where I kind of discuss more of this kind of stuff, like where we headed and how do we as people, as human beings, best address it. sort of sustainability and spirituality kind of in there. I have a Substack called truthsmack.substack.com, which is more about journalism, especially controversial subjects. And so I was addressing some of what I call election conspiracies and election myths recently on that, but we talked about JFK and UFOs and kind of controversial subjects from a journalistic point of view. What can we actually kind of corroborate? And then I have a new one called the HumboldtZag.substack.com, which is a local news thing. And we talked about that on an earlier podcast. We did a 5-part series on Kyle Zollner, and I just did a pretty long thing on Jared Huffman's re-election juggernaut, which I think you should check out, and we'll have more.
Yeah, I can't recommend your pieces enough to people. And hopefully the bus doesn't crash relatively soon so that we can continue doing these podcasts and talking about these ideas.
Okay.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Nick.